Welcome to HD Rare Coins, your ultimate source for rare coins, fascinating history, and the thrill of discovery. From legendary pennies to hidden gems, we explore the world of numismatics one amazing coin at a time. The year was 1942, and the air in America was thick with tension. Radios buzzed with news from across the oceans, names like Midway, Guadalcanal, and Stalingrad echoed in the homes of millions. It was a world at war, and every corner of American life had shifted. Ration books replaced grocery lists. Victory gardens bloomed in backyards. Factories once devoted to car parts now churned out tanks and bullets. Even coins, those tiny pieces of everyday metal, would not escape untouched, and in the middle of it all, came the nickel. At first glance, the 1942 5-cent piece didn't look any different. The familiar profile of Thomas Jefferson still gazed stoically to the left, his name quietly etched beneath. Monticello still sat firm on the reverse, dignified and symmetrical. The edges were still smooth. It rang the same when tossed onto a wooden counter, but something had changed. Beneath the surface, beneath the luster and the weight, lay a secret born of wartime urgency. Nickel, the metal itself, had become critical to the war effort. It was needed for armor plating, airplane parts, and artillery. The U.S. government couldn't afford to waste it on everyday currency. And so, in October 1942, something subtle yet monumental occurred. The composition of the 5-cent coin was altered. Nickel was removed. In its place came a blend of silver, manganese, and copper, a combination never before used in American coinage. These were called war nickels. They didn't look particularly different at first glance, but there were clues. The most famous: a large mint mark hovering above the Monticello on the reverse. For the first time ever, the Philadelphia Mint marked its coins with a bold P. Before 1942, the Philadelphia Mint didn't mark its coins at all. But now, the war had changed that, too, and collectors, they noticed. One by one, these coins were tucked away. Some by children who felt the weight of history even in their small hands. Others by soldiers returning from war, saving tokens of a world that had nearly burned itself to the ground. And yet, most of these nickels were spent, forgotten, circulated into the dusty corners of gas station registers and forgotten in coffee cans in old basements, until, decades later, someone looked closely. One such nickel was found in a shoebox in Illinois in 1997. The house had belonged to a widow named Evelyn Hart. She had passed quietly, with no children to claim her estate. Neighbors described her as gentle, fond of crossword puzzles and cats. But as her home was cleared, a faded shoebox wrapped in twine emerged from the back of a closet. Inside, dozens of silver nickels. Most were tarnished, worn down from time. But one, nestled between old photographs and a church bulletin from 1943, gleamed just a little brighter. A 1942 P. war nickel, uncirculated, full steps across Monticello. Luster intact. Details razor sharp, sent to grading. NGC confirmed, MS 68 with full steps. There were only a handful known in such pristine condition. Final auction price $89,000, and that was just the beginning, because the 1942 nickel wasn't just one coin. It was two. In that same year, both nickel-based and silver-based 5-cent pieces were struck, making it one of the rare instances in U.S. coinage where two entirely different metal compositions were minted in the same year, with the same design, but completely different legacies. The early part of the year produced traditional copper-nickel coins. These had no large mint mark. They were familiar, standard, but the latter half, October through December, those were the war nickels. Lighter in feel, slightly different in tone, and marked boldly with mint letters above Monticello. This strange duality has made 1942 one of the most collected years in American numismatics, not because it was rare in numbers, millions were made, but because of its symbolism. It was a coin born from necessity. A coin that held history in its very core. And some were stranger still. A handful of 1,942 nickels, less than a dozen confirmed, were accidentally struck with proof dies intended for collectors. But on circulation planchets, these hybrids carried sharp details, mirrored fields, and unmatched brilliance. Experts still argue whether they were official issues or quiet mint escapes, slipped into the hands of workers who knew what they held. Point 1 surfaced at a coin show in 2015. It had been kept in a thick plastic sleeve, taped to a journal filled with war letters from a sailor named Jack Norton. The coin had been his lucky piece, never spent, never traded. A small talisman in a world gone mad. Jack's son, unaware of its value, brought it to be appraised. PCGS graded it as a 1942 proofstrike circulation planchet error, only one of its kind. Price undisclosed, rumors estimate over $150,000. Because value, in the world of coins, isn't always about rarity, sometimes it's about story, and the 1942 nickel tells one like no other. Not all treasure is buried, sometimes it's wrapped in foil, dropped into a pillowcase, and mistaken for candy. In 1984. A 6-year-old girl named Claire wandered through a chilly Massachusetts neighborhood on Halloween night. Her costume was a crumpled cat. Her plastic jack-o'-lantern bucket rattled with the familiar mix of candy corn and chocolate coins, those fake golden things that everyone knew weren't real money. But somewhere in the middle of all that sugar and noise, she found something different. A coin that felt colder. Heavier. She didn't eat it, she dropped it into a drawer and forgot it. Years later, her father, sorting through old drawers, spotted it. The coin was gray, dull, but strange. It didn't quite match the others in the house. It said 1942. It bore the profile of Thomas Jefferson, aged and worn, but the detail around Monticello was stronger than expected. Then he flipped it over, and froze, above Monticello, a bold, unmistakable D. Denver. Mint mark, but that wasn't supposed to be there, not on that side. That he brought it to a local collector, who paled when he saw that it was real. A 1942 D war nickel struck on a silver planchet, confirmed with metallurgical analysis. But the kicker? It had an extremely rare reverse double die, doubling visible in the words E pluribus unum and faintly along the dome of Monticello, sent to grading. Certified by PCGS.MS 67, DDR reverse. It was one of only 3 ever found. That coin, forgotten in a Halloween bucket, sold for $124,000 in a private transaction, and still, the stories kept coming, because 1942 was the kind of year that left fingerprints on everything. Factories had shifted gears, machinery retooled in haste, with older equipment still being used alongside experimental dies. The mint was under enormous pressure to produce coinage while conserving critical materials. Mistakes weren't just likely, they were inevitable. And in those mistakes, beauty often bloomed. There were the over-polished dies, where Monticello lost its steps entirely, like a ghost building washed away by time. Collectors call them no-steps errors. Some saw it as a flaw, others as a rarity worth chasing. A few of these ghosted Monticello coins showed up in bank rolls and even vending machine change decades later, their value hiding in plain sight, overlooked by millions. Then there was the tale of a janitor at the Philadelphia Mint who, decades after retiring, came forward in a radio interview. He claimed that during late-night cleaning shifts, he saw workers hand-striking coins using experimental metals and test dies, many of which he said were destroyed before daylight. But not all. One, he said, was pocketed during chaos. It was never reported. He claimed it bore a P mint mark and a date of 1942, but had no silver content at all. Just copper. No nickel. No manganese. A prototype. If it exists, it's never surfaced, but if it ever does, its value could be unimaginable. In Kansas, a man going through his late uncle's coin collection found what looked like a normal 1942 P nickel, but under a loupe, the edges were razor sharp. The strike was flawless. And the coin shimmered in a way others didn't. He sent it to be graded, proof strike, but 1942 proofs were only officially minted in Philadelphia for collector sets, and those had a polished appearance, clearly separated from regular issue. His wasn't part of any set. It had the look of a business strike, but the quality of a proof. It defied classification. Experts believed it to be a transitional strike, possibly one of the earliest uses of a fresh die set up for proofs but mistakenly fed into regular circulation before protocol was finalized. Its final sale, $87,500. Because when coins carry that kind of ambiguity, that kind of mystery, they don't just hold monetary value. They become historical artifacts. Art. Myth. Questions wrapped in copper and silver, and in 1942, those questions never stopped multiplying. Some researchers believe a tiny batch of 1942's nickels were struck using leftover nickel-copper planchets, despite the switch to silver already being in effect. These are hard to identify without precision equipment, as the weight difference is minute. But once found, their unmistakable point one was located in 2004 in a Michigan estate. Found wedged inside a dusty photo album, behind a picture of a World War II infantryman. It weighed 5 grams, heavier than the wartime silver composition, confirmed. Nickel-copper. It was a mistake. A leftover. A coin made of the wrong metal during the right war, auction value, $103,000. All because someone checked a weight, all because a soldier tucked it behind a photo, and still, the mystery of the 1942 nickel lives on, because even today, in 2025, new examples continue to surface. Not from ancient hoards or elite auctions, but from glove compartments. From pickle jars. From the bottoms of toolboxes long sealed. The war had ended. Soldiers were coming home with dust in their boots and silence in their eyes. Factories that once forged bullets and bombers were now reshaping themselves into peacetime engines. The world had changed, and America, though still standing, was learning how to breathe again, and in the soft echo of that new peace, the 1946 5-cent coin was born. It didn't arrive with the drama of its wartime predecessor. There were no secret metal formulas or emergency compositions. No bold new mintmarks above Monticello. Just the quiet return of something familiar, copper and nickel, pressed once again into the shape of Thomas Jefferson's legacy. To most, it was just a coin, but to those who looked closer, it was more. It was a symbol of return. The war nickels, with their dull gray finish and large mint marks, were a testament to sacrifice. The 1946 nickel, by contrast, gleamed brighter. It whispered stability. It marked the first full year after World War II that America returned to its standard 5-cent composition. The nickel was back to being a nickel. And yet, beneath its surface, that return was anything but simple. The mint, still recovering from the chaos of wartime production, didn't just flip a switch and resume perfection. Dies were reused longer than normal. Machinery hadn't been replaced, only repurposed. And mints like Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco faced backlogs they were racing to catch up with. Mistakes were made, some, subtle, others, extraordinary. It was during a storm in the spring of 1946 that one such coin was born. The Philadelphia Mint had resumed operations in full, despite power fluctuations citywide. One of the presses struck a batch of nickels just as a lightning surge hit the grid. The result wasn't visible in machinery logs, but the coins told the truth. A handful were struck with overpressure. The dies slammed into planchets with such force that Jefferson's jawline, typically smooth and modest, appeared doubled, thicker. Boulder. One such coin was discovered in 1980 in a tin lunchbox belonging to a steelworker. His grandson, fascinated with coins, took it to a local coin shop. It was different, graded MS 67 by PCGS, with a strong, confirmed double die obverse, in 1946 nickel, struck during a lightning storm, that shouldn't have existed at all. Estimated value, $$96,000. And that was just the beginning. It was easy to overlook that in a world bursting with ticker tape parades, GI bills, and the first flickers of the baby boom, who had time to stare at a 5-cent coin, and yet, while the world was rebuilding, the mint's machines never paused. They had a duty, to provide currency for a nation learning to live again. But these weren't machines of perfection. They bore scars. Dents. Faint rattles from years of overuse. In Philadelphia, some dies were so worn they produced coins with ghost-like features. Jefferson's I barely etched, Monticello fading like a dream on the reverse. These weren't just coins. They were the last breath of exhausted tools, and still, the public spent them, tossed them in fountains, slid them across diners for slices of pie, until, decades later, one turned up in Oregon. It wasn't shiny. It didn't shimmer. But its Monticello was wrong, struck not once, but twice. A clear reverse die clash, where parts of Jefferson's head appeared behind the building, like a shadow caught in the act of haunting its own history. No one at the time cared about clashes. They were factory floor mistakes. Today, that same error nickel, authenticated and certified, fetched $72,000. Because the deeper you look into 1946 nickels, the more secrets you find. In San Francisco, the story took a different twist. Minted coins in 1946 were struck in lower numbers than their Philadelphia and Denver siblings. Only about 13.5 million left the West Coast that year, making the 1946 the rarest of the three. Most of them circulated heavily in the Pacific states, wore down fast, disappeared into jars and junk drawers, but one managed to avoid all of that. In 1993, a man named Robert Dalton, sorting through his late father's estate, found a dusty old box of war bonds. Tucked in between the faded papers and ration stamps was a coin holder, handmade from cardboard and tape. Inside was a single coin. A 1946 nickel. It was radiant, frosted Jefferson, mirrored fields. Razor-sharp Monticello, proof-like, but 1946 nickels weren't officially made as proofs. Robert's coin was different. It bore all the traits of a special strike, likely from a freshly prepared die used early in the minting cycle. The mint had no official record of proof production in San Francisco that year, yet here was a coin that defied that narrative, graded MS-68 PL, proof-like. Only one of its kind known, auctioned at $108,000. Even stranger still, a sealed glass jar of honey, discovered in the wall of a Wisconsin farmhouse during renovation, revealed another miracle. Inside the amber sweetness, preserved by decades of sugar and darkness, was a nickel, a 1946 D. No oxidation. No wear. Just a glint of silver gray and the clean lines of untouched metal. How it got there, no one knows. Why someone would seal a coin in honey, in a jar, in a wall, is anyone's guess, but once removed and cleaned, the nickel was perfect. Full steps. Brilliant luster. Die polish lines visible under magnification, graded MS-68 FS, full steps, Denver Mint, sold for $94,000 in a heritage auction. That coin became known as the Honey Nickel. And it wasn't alone. The 1946 nickels, while born of normal materials and routine intent, carry with them stories that sound anything but ordinary. Because the first year after a world war is never truly normal. Machines stutter. People make mistakes. History leaves fingerprints in places no one expects, on steel dies, on blank planchets, on moments frozen in copper and nickel. Even today, collectors whisper about a missing die pairing, a reverse design intended for late 1946 use that may have only been tested and never issued. Yet, some believe a few slipped through. A collector in Ohio, going through estate coins left by his grandfather, found a 1946 P that looked off. The reverse had unusual spacing in United States of America and a strangely aligned E pluribus unum. Experts believe it may be one of those experimental pairings that, if confirmed, it could be the only known transitional reverse die coin for that year. Current estimates: $115,000 to $135,000, depending on final authentication. And this coin, this simple 5-cent piece, continues to defy all expectations, because in the eyes of the world, it was just a return to form, but in the eyes of collectors, historians, and storytellers, it was a quiet masterpiece. The year was 1969. The world was spinning on the edge of both chaos and wonder. A man had just walked on the moon, the Vietnam War burned across TV screens, and music, raw, electric, revolutionary, pulsed from every diner, basement, and college dorm. America was changing. Fast. Loud. Restless, and in the middle of it all, machines inside the U.S. Mint kept doing something quiet, something ordinary, pressing metal into history. That year, one of the most overlooked coins ever struck in American history was born, the 5-cent piece. Jefferson's face. Monticello's quiet dome. The nickel that no one really thought about. It passed through thousands of hands, pocketed by gas station attendants, flipped by teens in diners, lost beneath car seats and found again during laundry day. No one gave it a second glance. No one suspected that among those everyday coins, a few would one day become some of the most hunted, most whispered about nickels in American numismatics, because 1969 wasn't just any year. It was a year of pressure. The Denver Mint was working overtime. Philadelphia struggled with equipment strain. San Francisco, tasked mainly with proof coinage, was experimenting with quality and quantity, and mistakes happened, extraordinary ones, like the one discovered in a dusty estate in Iowa that a man going through his grandfather's belongings found a sealed coin holder marked Moon Year Nickel. It wasn't the label that stood out, it was the coin inside. At first glance, it looked normal. Jefferson's jawline clean, Monticello behind him sharp and proud. But the texture? Different. The fields? Mirrored. Too mirrored. This was no ordinary circulation coin. He brought it to a show in Chicago, under magnification. Experts froze. It was a proof-like strike, minted in Philadelphia, something never officially recorded for that year. A coin with polished dies, frosted devices, and the kind of reflection you'd expect from a San Francisco proof. But this was no proof. It was real. PCGS graded at MS 68 PL full steps, only one of its kind, auctioned privately for $132,000. But that was just the first domino, because once news of that coin spread, collectors began digging. Through change jars. Through old collections. Through forgotten coin folders stuffed away in attics and safety deposit boxes, and that's when things got even stranger. Another coin, this time from Denver, surfaced with doubling across Jefferson's lips and eye. At first, it was dismissed as die-ware. But a seasoned collector named Henry Waldman knew better. He'd seen true doubling before. He sent it for authentication. It was confirmed, double die obverse. The doubling wasn't just visible, it was textbook. Strong, clean, irrefutable. The first major DDO found on a 1969 D nickel coin forums lit up. Coin World ran a feature. And the market shifted. Collectors who once ignored the 1969 issue were now combing through rolls, hoping to find the next big error hiding in plain sight. Henry's coin sold for $88,000. All because he looked twice, and still, the stories kept coming. In the summer of 1997, in a sleepy Indiana town where nothing ever really changed, the local branch of a long-shuttered bank was being cleared out for demolition. The building, quiet for decades, still carried the scent of musty paper and old leather chairs. Forgotten deposit slips still lined the drawers. Filing cabinets sat like tombstones to a bygone era, but what caught the attention of the workers wasn't in any file. It was in the basement. There, beneath layers of dust and an unused teller desk, sat a wooden lockbox, stamped, Federal Coin Shipment, 1969. Inside, dozens of sealed Federal Reserve paper rolls, each containing 1969 D. Jefferson Nickels, untouched for nearly 30 years. The coins gleamed when unwrapped, brilliant, uncirculated, frosty in some places, mirror-like in others, but one coin, just one, was different. It had no mint mark. That made no sense. In 1969, Philadelphia didn't strike nickels for general circulation. Every known 1969 nickel bore either a D for Denver or an S for San Francisco proofs, but here it was, clear as day. A 1969 nickel with full steps on Monticello and no visible mint mark. Not worn. Not polished away. Just, never there. The coin was immediately submitted for metallurgical testing. And that's when the truth became even stranger. It wasn't made from the normal copper-nickel alloy. It was silvered. A 35% silver planchet, a leftover from the wartime composition that had supposedly vanished from U.S. mintage nearly 25 years earlier. Somehow, a blank planchet from another era had slipped back into the system and was struck with 1969 dies. Whether it was an accident, or an intentional test, no one could say, but experts could say this: it was one of a kind. It sold at auction, under heavy security, for $196,000. And it may still be the only known 1969 silver 5-cent strike in existence, but perhaps the most heartbreaking story came from a kid named Trevor James. In 2004, Trevor, then 13, inherited his grandfather's coin box. Inside were dozens of odd pieces, Canadian pennies, foreign tokens, and a few neat-looking American nickels. One of them, though, looked especially clean. He liked the way it shimmered under the light. It felt heavy in his hand, cooler than the others. He showed it to a friend, who said it wasn't worth more than 5 cents. So Trevor did what any 13-year-old might do. He walked into the corner shop and bought a candy bar. A coin collector standing in line noticed the coin just before the cashier dropped it into the register. He asked to examine it, then quickly offered the cashier $10 for it on the spot. The cashier, confused but curious, agreed. That coin was a 1969 D nickel struck on a dime planchet, thinner, lighter, with a noticeable off-center strike and slight cupping from the pressure mismatch. Authenticated and graded MS-65. Sold months later $4.58,000. Trevor's 5-cent candy bar had just cost him a small fortune that he never forgot it, neither did the collector, who turned around and told Trevor's mother, slipping him back half the profit as a quiet thank you. Trevor used it years later to buy his first car, but for the rest of his life, he remembered that nickel, because coins, like moments, are fragile, and in 1969, a year that roared with chaos and invention, the coins that slid off the presses bore more than just Jefferson's face. They carried stories, they carried errors that weren't supposed to happen, planchets that shouldn't have existed, dies that shouldn't have been used, strikes that turned out far too perfect or far too strange. They carried time, and they carried value.